For more than a decade, Phil Spencer wasn't simply the head of Xbox, he was Xbox. Whenever Microsoft needed to reassure players, explain a controversial decision, or generate excitement for the future, Phil was normally the person standing in front of the camera. He appeared at showcases, joined podcasts, spoke directly to fans, and presented himself as the approachable gamer running one of the largest entertainment businesses in the world. And then, almost without anyone noticing at first, he started to disappear. His interviews became less frequent. Other executives began representing Xbox. Sarah Bond increasingly became the public face of the platform, while Matt Booty handled conversations surrounding Microsoft's enormous collection of game studios. Then, in February 2026, the announcement arrived. After 38 years at Microsoft and 12 years leading its gaming division, Phil Spencer was retiring. Asha Sharma, an executive previously associated with Microsoft's core AI organization, would replace him as the head of Microsoft Gaming. Sarah Bond, who many people assumed would eventually succeed Spencer, was also leaving. For Xbox fans, it felt incredibly sudden. But the reality is more complicated. Phil Spencer did not simply wake up one morning and decide to leave Xbox. His disappearance appears to have been a slow withdrawal taking place behind the scenes, while Microsoft prepared for one of the biggest leadership transitions in Xbox history. The first thing we need to understand is just how unusual Phil Spencer's position had become. When he took control of Xbox in 2014, the brand was still recovering from the disastrous launch of the Xbox One. Microsoft had entered that generation with confusing messaging surrounding an always online console, restrictions on used games, mandatory Kinect integration, and a launch price that was significantly higher than the PlayStation 4. Phil inherited a damaged brand. Over the following decade, he helped reverse many of those decisions. Xbox introduced backward compatibility, expanded heavily into PC gaming, created Xbox Game Pass, and began supporting crossplay at a time when Sony was still extremely cautious about allowing it. Microsoft also acquired Mojang, Bethesda's parent company ZeniMax, and eventually Activision Blizzard. Under Spencer, Microsoft's gaming business nearly tripled in size and expanded across console, PC, mobile, and cloud gaming. That is a positive version of Phil Spencer's legacy, but by the time he left, Xbox had become almost unrecognizable from the company he took over. Phil was no longer simply managing Halo, Forza, and Gears of War. He was responsible for an organization containing nearly 40 studios and franchises including Call of Duty, Fallout, The Elder Scrolls, Minecraft, Diablo, Warcraft, and Candy Crush. The Activision Blizzard acquisition alone cost Microsoft approximately $68.7 billion and took far longer to complete than the company initially expected. Once the deal finally closed, Xbox faced the enormous challenge of integrating Activision, Blizzard, and King into Microsoft's existing gaming structure. That process changed Phil Spencer's job. He was no longer primarily a public-facing platform executive. He was becoming the manager of a vast global entertainment empire, dealing with regulators, corporate restructuring, studio budgets, layoffs, release schedules, and pressure from Microsoft's senior leadership to justify the extraordinary amount of money being invested in gaming. According to reporting from The Verge, Sarah Bond gradually became more visible as Spencer concentrated on integrating Microsoft's much larger gaming business. Bond had been promoted to president of Xbox shortly after the Activision Blizzard acquisition was completed, and she increasingly represented the platform publicly. This helps explain the beginning of Phil Spencer's disappearance. He had not technically vanished, he was still the CEO of Microsoft Gaming, but the nature of his position had changed, and Xbox was slowly distributing his old responsibilities across several executives. There was also a growing strategic crisis inside Xbox. For years, Microsoft attempted to compete with PlayStation by building a stronger console ecosystem and acquiring exclusive games, but the Xbox Series X and Series S failed to significantly close the hardware gap with Sony. Microsoft responded by changing the definition of success. Instead of concentrating entirely on selling Xbox consoles, the company began putting its games on more devices. Former Xbox exclusives started appearing on PlayStation and Nintendo systems. Cloud gaming expanded to televisions, phones, and tablets. Microsoft launched the "This is an Xbox" campaign, suggesting that practically any device capable of running Xbox games could become part of the Xbox platform. From a corporate perspective, the logic was understandable. Microsoft had spent billions acquiring some of the largest franchises in gaming. Restricting those games to a smaller console audience would limit how much revenue those acquisitions could generate. But from the perspective of traditional Xbox owners, the strategy created an identity crisis. If Xbox games were available everywhere, why should someone buy an Xbox console? And when that question became difficult to answer, Phil Spencer increasingly found himself representing a strategy that many of Xbox's most loyal customers did not understand or support. Reporting later suggested that Microsoft's push beyond the console had caused frustration internally as well. Xbox hardware revenue had declined across several financial years, while campaigns designed to redefine the Xbox brand produced mixed reactions from employees and consumers. This is where Phil Spencer's absence started to become more noticeable. During the earlier years of his leadership, Phil would often appear whenever Xbox faced difficult questions. He would sit down for interviews, acknowledge mistakes, and attempt to explain the company's long-term thinking. But during the final stages of his time at Microsoft, there were more questions than one person could realistically answer. Why were Xbox games moving to PlayStation? Was Microsoft abandoning console exclusivity? Why were studios being closed after Microsoft had spent billions acquiring them? Was Game Pass actually producing enough growth? What did the phrase "this is an Xbox" even mean? And perhaps most importantly, who was Xbox actually being built for? There were no simple answers. In February 2025, Spencer reportedly took an extended holiday during which some Xbox teams had to wait for approval on important decisions. Rumors began circulating inside Microsoft that he could be preparing to retire. The rumors eventually became public in July 2025 during another major round of Microsoft's layoffs. Microsoft responded firmly, saying Phil was not retiring anytime soon. At the time, that appeared to end the speculation. But only a few months later, according to Microsoft's official version of events, Spencer informed Satya Nadella that he was considering stepping back and beginning the next chapter of his life. Microsoft says succession planning then continued privately for several months. This is why the announcement felt sudden, even though the decision apparently was not. The public had been told Phil was staying. Behind closed doors, Microsoft was preparing for his departure. And the announcement itself did not arrive in the carefully controlled way Microsoft originally intended. According to The Verge, the leadership change was supposed to be announced several days later, but details started leaking to the press. Microsoft brought the announcement forward, creating confusion inside Xbox as some employees discovered what was happening through news reports rather than internal communication. That explains the strange atmosphere surrounding his exit. There was no enormous farewell showcase, no lengthy documentary celebrating his career, no emotional final appearance in front of Xbox fans. Instead, there were corporate emails, a Microsoft blog post, and an announcement that became public earlier than planned. For someone who had spent years being the recognizable face of Xbox, it felt surprisingly clinical. This has naturally created theories that Phil was pushed out. Some commentators and industry personalities have questioned Microsoft's official timeline, particularly because the company had denied his retirement rumors only months earlier. However, there is currently no definitive public evidence proving that Spencer was fired or forced to retire. What we can say is that he left during one of the most difficult periods in Xbox's history. Microsoft had completed the largest acquisition the gaming industry had ever seen, but it was also closing studios and cutting jobs. Xbox hardware revenue was declining. Game Pass had transformed the subscription market, but it had not completely replaced the need for traditional game and console sales. The multi-platform strategy might eventually produce enormous revenue for Microsoft, but it had also weakened the simple idea of Xbox as a console with games that could not be played anywhere else. Phil Spencer helped build that strategy, but he was also being forced to manage its consequences. This is why I do not think the story is as simple as Phil Spencer failing, being removed and disappearing. His departure feels more like the conclusion of an era that had reached its natural limit. Phil was the right leader for Xbox when the company needed to repair its relationship with players. He understood gaming culture, spoke naturally about games, and helped reverse many of the unpopular policies associated with the original Xbox One vision. But Xbox eventually became too large and too complicated to revolve around one charismatic executive. Once Microsoft owned Activision Blizzard, Bethesda, Minecraft, and dozens of studios, the gaming division stopped behaving like a traditional console manufacturer. It became a global content subscription, publishing, advertising, and technology business. At that point, the friendly gamer wearing an Xbox t-shirt was no longer enough. Microsoft wanted a leader experienced in scaling massive consumer platforms and aligning different parts of the business. That appears to be why Asher Sharma was chosen instead of simply promoting another familiar Xbox personality. Spencer officially welcomed Sharma and expressed confidence in her leadership. Microsoft said he would remain involved during the transition, with reports indicating that he would continue in an advisory capacity through the summer. So, what actually happened to Phil Spencer? Officially, he retired after 38 years at Microsoft. Behind the scenes, he appears to have been gradually stepping away while Microsoft reorganized Xbox, integrated Activision Blizzard and prepared a new leadership structure. And the reason it felt so sudden was not necessarily because the decision was made suddenly. It felt sudden because Microsoft kept the transition private, denied earlier speculation, and then had to announce the news early when it began leaking. Phil Spencer did not disappear because of one disastrous decision. He disappeared because the version of Xbox he had been hired to lead no longer existed. He took control of a struggling console division in 2014 and left behind one of the largest gaming publishers in the world. Whether the transformation ultimately saves Xbox or destroys its identity will probably define how his leadership is remembered. His legacy is therefore complicated. He helped save Xbox after the Xbox One disaster. He championed backward compatibility, crossplay, accessibility, PC gaming, and Game Pass. But he also oversaw a generation in which Xbox consoles continued losing ground. Major studios were closed, employees were laid off, and the company's identity became increasingly difficult to explain. Phil Spencer leaves Xbox as both the man who rescued the brand and the executive who transformed it into something many of its own customers no longer recognize. And perhaps that is the real reason his departure feels so important. Xbox has spent years telling players that every screen can be an Xbox. Now, for the first time in more than a decade, it has to prove that Xbox can still be Xbox without Phil Spencer.